Leviticus chapter 11, please. You can meet me there in Leviticus chapter 11. Good start to December and the holiday season. I know we're not in December yet, but we will be before you know it. We are starting off the month here in Fusion with our high school Christmas party. So we're going to have it early. It's going to be this coming Wednesday, the 1st of December. It's the 1st of December. Let's just get going, right? And so make sure that you're here on Wednesday night and you don't miss out. It is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have some Christmas karaoke happening. We're asking that you guys bring different food items. I'll explain some more of this at the end because I've got announcements and then a slide to show you at the end so that you have a better idea. But Leviticus chapter 11, we are going to be looking at clean and unclean animals. Sounds exciting, right? Clean and unclean animals. Everybody likes a clean animal. Unclean animals, not so much. But we'll talk about that and about how that fits in here to what God is teaching his people. And then what we are going to try really hard to do is to look at Leviticus chapter 12 also. I think it's like 8 verses or something. Let me look again. What was that? Why is it doing that? That's what. Give me 1 second. What's that? 8. Yeah, so we're gonna try and fit that in also. Leviticus chapter 11 is where we are at, and there are some main divisions for those of you that are note takers, okay? The first one is clean and unclean animals. That'll be our first section. Then we will look at carcasses. Anybody know what a carcass is? Yes.
Dead body.
A what?
Dead body.
A dead body. Okay, very good. So we'll look at dead animals. Right? Exciting stuff for a Sunday morning. Creeping things forbidden for food. Now, creeping things are off limits. Some of you, not a problem with that, right? I just say creeping things, and you're just done. You're like, I don't want to have anything to do with creeping things anyways. Why in the world would I eat them? Okay, like baked crickets at the Los Angeles County Fair. Anybody? Yeah? Yes, there's my people right there. Yeah, they're not bad. They're not bad. Creeping things forbidden for food, and then a call to holiness. That is Leviticus chapter 11. I didn't put up chapter 12 yet because I'm hoping we'll get there. I'm going to try real hard here. But the first section, clean and unclean animals, and these are divided up for us real well here. Verses 1 and 2, we are going to see the land animals. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron. Sometimes God was speaking to Moses to speak to Aaron. In the previous chapter, we saw that God spoke to Aaron directly. Now he's speaking to both of these leaders here, Moses and Aaron. Moses being the leader of the entire camp. And, you might say, this is not even accurate, but you might say that he's more of the political leader. And then you have Aaron, the religious leader. But Moses kind of, went back and forth. And, but anyhow, he's speaking to both of them, Moses and Aaron. And here's what he said to them. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Now, the first thing that you and I do is we look at that and we go, wow, animals, Sunday morning, Leviticus, sounds super boring, okay? And why in the world would we take the time, or why would God even take the time to talk to his people about animals that are clean or unclean, or animals that they may eat? Some of you may be big-time animal people, and you might be vegetarians, and you might say, you know what, I wouldn't eat any animals anyway, and that's gross, and why would God even do that? But you must understand that God he's brought the people out of Egypt. Remember that they were slaves. These people that he's talking to were born into and raised up in slavery. So they have that mentality. They have that mentality, the Egyptian mentality. They saw what the Egyptians were doing and how the Egyptians were living and what the Egyptians trusted in. We saw back in Exodus that when they realized that, or when they thought that Moses was not returning, what did they do? They immediately made themselves a golden calf and began to worship that, something that they had seen the Egyptians do. So that Egyptian lifestyle and mindset is ingrained in them. And God is like a physician. He is removing that ever so precisely, lovingly, gently, but taking it out. If you had a sickness in your body like a cancer or some other sickness, you would want the doctor to get it out. When you have a cold in your body, you take medicine to get it out. Okay? When you have a splinter in your foot, you dig it out with some tweezers or whatever it is that you use. You get a bee sting in you, you dig it out. You don't want that there. It's a bad thing. And so the same thing, Egypt is inside of his people. And so God in Exodus removed his people from Egypt. Now in Leviticus, he's removing Egypt from the hearts of his people surgically. And he's going step by step, teaching these people how to live, how to fend for themselves. Same thing was true in this country. We're familiar, somewhat familiar, with slavery and people that were born into and raised in slavery. And when they were set free, many of them had to learn how to conduct themselves just in the world, not being told what to do, but making decisions for themselves. It's you may think that, well, not a big deal. You just kind of jump back into it or jump into it. But when you've been raised a certain way, it's hard to think any other way. And so these people have been raised that way. They have that mentality, and God is trying to take that out of them. And so that's why he takes the time. That's why he spends a chapter talking to them about animals, unclean or clean and unclean. That's why he takes time to talk to them about carcasses. Like what? Because they do not know. And so God is teaching them and teaching his children. And again, like I've said a while back, that's what a good father does. Hopefully, your father, being a good father, your earthly father has been a good father and taught you things. Taught you, and I'm talking about basic things. I'm not just talking about Bible studies and, well, he taught me about Samson or Noah or whatever. I'm talking about, did he teach you how to tie your shoes? Maybe he just bought you Velcro shoes or slip-ons. But did he teach you other things? How to ride a bike, how to make a grilled cheese, how to, whatever. I don't know, how to vacuum, how to whatever, just how to take care of a dog, whatever. Just various practical things. Those are things that a good dad does. Now, if your earthly father hasn't done those things, well, now all of you guys in here know what you need to do when you start having kids. You teach them all the basics. Ladies too, obviously. But God is being a good heavenly father. And so he says in verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say this, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on earth. Now, keep in mind, he's going to give a list of animals. It's done in a general sense, okay? So he talks about the land animals, and what he does, I didn't put this next one up there, but in verse 3, he talks about the clean animals. And this is all he says. He gives us two things. He says, among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves, and chewing the cud, that you may eat. So Fusion, help me out, please. What animal do you know of that has a split hoof or a cloven hoof and chews the cud? Anybody?
Cow.
Yeah, a cow. Cow, right? I just saw one yesterday up in Oak Glen. Huge cow, Angus beef, cloven hoof, and chews the cud. So those would be safe to eat. If there are any other animals that you can think of that have a cloven hoof or a split hoof, and they chew the cud, then they were clean. They were safe to eat. They were considered clean. Now in verse 4, he goes on to say, nevertheless, these you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, or those that have cloven hooves. The camel. The camel can't eat the camel because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves. It's got to have both. It's unclean to you, verse 4. And then look at this, verse 5, the rock hyrax. You guys know what that is, right? I don't. I looked it up, and it looked so cute, furry. It was kind of like this, I couldn't really tell how big it was, but they showed this picture of like this really cute kind of furry little, I don't know, kind of like a guinea pig type of thing.
A badger?
Something like that, You've seen one before?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. About how big?
They're like this big.
Okay. It looked really cute. And then as I was scrolling through the pictures, they showed another one. It was like his mouth was open with these these teeth ready to like kill me. And all of a sudden it didn't look so cute. Okay? But the rock hyrax can't do that. He says this in verse 5. Because it does chew the cud, but does not have cloven hooves. It's unclean to you. Verse 6, the hare. We would consider that to be the rabbit. It's a different type of animal, but the hare is not allowed. Verse 7, the swine, the pig, pork. Not allowed to do that. Did you guys hear about Subway and their tuna? Anybody hear about that? Yeah, you heard about how it's mixed with different meats?
Plastic too.
What's that?
They found like plastics in it too now.
Yeah, find all kinds of things, but now there's all kinds of lawsuits because they even found pork in their tuna. I don't know if you knew this, but tuna and pork are two different things. Do you care? I do. Verse 8. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. So you can't eat these animals. You can't even touch them if they're dead. You get a stick and push them away. In verse 9, he talks about the sea animals, beginning at verse 9. And the first thing he tells us in verse 9 is how to decipher which ones are clean. These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. So, anybody know of a sea animal that has fins and scales? Tilapia, okay. I heard some others kind of whispered, whole bunch of fish, right? There's a whole bunch of with fins and scales. Can you think of something that doesn't have fins and scales?
Like sharks or whales.
Okay. Yeah, sharks, whales, no scales, right? So in verse 10, he tells us the unclean. Now the first ones you can eat. In verse 10, but all in the seas or in the rivers that do not have fins and scales, all that move in the water, or any living thing which is in the water, they are an abomination to you. Abomination. That means detested or hated. He says you got to hate those things. Verse 11, they shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses as an abomination. So don't eat them. Don't touch them if they're dead. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that shall be an abomination to you. Now here, we start to get a little bit of a clue because what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves this. Why? Why can you not eat those things? And that's a great question, and it's a question that I'm just going to tell you right up front, we do not have the answer to. God never said you can't eat these specific animals because they do this thing, or they have this thing, or they look this way. It's just you cannot eat these, and here's how you distinguish between the animals. But we have this clue as we go through this list. You'll kind of see like, oh, maybe it's because like swine, like pigs. What do pigs eat?
They eat a lot of junk.
Junk, anything, right? Slop. Okay. So maybe it has something to do with health. Maybe it has something to do with hygiene. Maybe God is protecting his people and saying, don't eat these animals because they're nasty. It's bad for you. And I mean, let's be honest. Bacon. I can smell it now. But it's bad for you, isn't it? Yes? No? It's bad for you. I don't know if you knew that. Okay? But eat as much as you can, because when you get a little bit older, you'll get high cholesterol, and you won't be able to eat it anymore, and you'll have to go to the store and buy turkey bacon, and you'll hate everybody that eats regular bacon. Okay?
Who eats turkey?
Okay? Turkey bacon. Yeah, that's what you do when you're old and you have high cholesterol. Okay? But anyhow, bacon. So we start to get this idea. Now let me ask you something about the sea animals. What's in the sea that doesn't have fins and scales?
Shrimp? Octopus.
Shrimp, octopus, dolphins. What else? Swordfish, what? Squid? Jellyfish? Okay. Squid?
Trash.
What? Oh, yes.
Jellyfish.
Jellyfish? Okay.
Sea urchins,
Crabs?
and so forth.
Lobsters? You know? All those different types of animals not allowed to eat. Okay? So we got clean and unclean. We move on to the birds in verse 13. birds in verse 13. So we have land, sea, maybe I should have said sky, but whatever. Birds, verse 13. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. Now, I'll tell you right up front, he's not going to tell us anything about the clean birds. Okay? All he tells us about is the unclean birds. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. Look at this list. The eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite. Okay, don't eat kites. And the falcon after its kind. Every raven after its kind. So he doesn't specify one. There are lots of different ravens. Every raven after its kind. The ostrich. Anybody ever been face to face with one of those things? An ostrich? Things are huge and scary. And those 3 claws, man, just like a raptor ready to just swipe you. The ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, the hawk after its kind, the little owl, the fisher owl, the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw. Good. I hate jackdaws. And the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopoe, and everyone's favorite, the bat. Okay? Not supposed to be eating those things. Now, again, I told you we start to get a clue. When you start to think about animals in the sea, like a crab or a lobster, things that crawl around and, you know, eat the junk off the bottom of the ocean. But look at this in verse 19. He mentions the hoopoe. And of course, in my strange mind, I thought, what's a hoopoe? What is a hoopoe? I looked it up. This is pretty incredible. All ornithologists agree that it is a nasty, filthy bird in its feeding and breeding habits. The nest, being paid no attention by the elders, soon becomes soiled and evil smelling. Like the cabin at winter camp. Soiled and evil smelling. Okay? The bird is mentioned only in the lists of abomination. One reason why Moses thought it unfit for food was on account of its habits. Quite as strong a one lay in the fact that it was one of the sacred birds of Egypt. So not only was it a filthy bird, but it was sacred in Egypt. So that would cause us to wonder. We don't know for sure, but we wonder how many of these animals were sacred to the Egyptians. And again, God attempting to remove Egypt from the heart of his people. But the description goes on to say this. There the belief was prevalent that it could detect water and indicate where to dig a well. That it could hear secrets and cure diseases. Its head was part of the charms used by witches. The hoopoe was believed to have wonderful medicinal powers and was called the doctor bird by the Arabs. I think that those people must have been smoking the hoopoe or something. But you get a clue that it's a filthy animal. So maybe, so after hearing, let me just ask you this. After hearing that these birds are filthy animals and that their nests become evil smelling, who's in a hurry to eat one? None of us, right? So maybe it's that God's trying to keep his people healthy by saying, don't eat these animals. Even the list before this where he talks about buzzards. What do buzzards do? What do they eat? They just eat the leftover stuff. They eat the roadkill, right? Okay? Vultures, buzzards, even falcons, ravens, all of these, the seagull. Seagulls are so nasty. Right? Seagulls are so nasty. Really cool as long as they stay away from your lunch when you're at the beach, but just stay away. But they're filthy. Digging through the trash, and so maybe it's that God is trying to keep his people healthy by telling them, hey, these are off limits. Verse 20. Verse 20, some of you will not have a problem with that. All insects. Verse 20, all flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Anybody got a problem with that? You're like, if it creeps on all fours, you like things that creep on all fours?
I'm just thinking of John the Baptist.
Yes, and we will talk about him. Yes, we will. So those are the unclean, okay? But let's look at the clean. Verses 21 through 23. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that creeps on all fours. Those which have jointed legs above their feet with which to leap on the earth. What do you think about?
Grasshoppers.
Grasshoppers, right? Grasshoppers. What else? Anything else?
Crickets.
Crickets. And I was a couple years ago, we were at the Los Angeles County Fair out in the animal barn. You guys, some of you are familiar with that. And there was this lady that came up with a tray of crickets. They were dead already. They were baked or cooked or something. I don't know, fried. I don't know what it was. But it was like, would you like some? And you scoop some and get them in your hand. You just pop them in your mouth, and they were actually pretty good. Okay. But those are the types of things. And so Levi mentioned John the Baptist. Does anybody remember what his diet consisted of? Locusts and honey. Locusts and wild honey. Sounds like my type of guy. Honey and locusts. Okay? Take a locust, dip it in, crunch. But as long as the animals had jointed legs above their feet with which to leap on the earth. These you may eat, he says in verse 22, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper. So I think most of us would consider the locust and grasshopper to be the same, but here God distinguishes between the two. But both of them, the locust and the grasshopper, we're more familiar with the grasshopper. Those are, you're allowed to eat those. Verse 23, but all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. So if they fly, and if they don't have jointed legs, okay, got it. See how precise God is being here. Let's move on to everybody's favorite section, the carcasses, verses 24 through 40. By these, okay, now what he's going to do in verses 24 through 28, he's going to give us just various animals. And let's see what he says. By these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcasses of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Now, let me explain something to you. We're talking about clean and unclean. We are not necessarily talking about sinless and sinful. We're talking about ceremonial cleansing or ceremonial uncleanliness. So as we go through this list, your mind may be formulating already like, man, if I ate some bacon, am I sinful? Well, that is not what we're talking about here. God is giving them ceremonial guidelines for ceremonial cleanliness and uncleanliness. And he says that in verse, he said it several times in here. Verse 24, at the very end he says that you will be unclean until evening. See, sin doesn't just disappear at night. Sin sticks with you. In this case, if you were to touch one of these carcasses, you would be unclean until evening. So there's this idea that it ends at a certain point. Okay? Verse 25, whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Not a problem. Carrying dead animals, I want to wash my clothes, and then I will be unclean just until evening. Verse 26, the carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven hoofed. If it doesn't have a cloven hoof, a split hoof, or does not chew the cud, it's unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean. And whatever goes on its paws, among all kinds of animals that go on all fours, those are unclean to you. What kind of animals go on all fours and have paws? Hyenas, dogs, cats. What else? Okay, those are the ones we think of, right? Dogs, cats. God says lion. Yes, it's cat. Okay, God says those are off limits. Can't eat those things and don't touch the carcass if it's dead. Okay, not supposed to eat those things. Verse 28, whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. So those were the various animals, various creeping things. These also shall be unclean to you. Verse 29, he mentions the mole, the mouse, the large lizard after its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that creep. Whoever touches them, when they are dead, shall be unclean until evening. And then you have the various items. We had various animals, various creeping things, and then just various items. Look at this, verse 32. God, again, being specific, giving specific directions. Anything on which any of them falls. So, when they are dead. So, one of these animals is dead. They fall on something. It says in verse 32, that item becomes unclean. Whether it is any item of wood or clothing, skin, sack, whatever it is, in which any work is done. It must be put in water. So put it in water. The idea is to wash it, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. So, the dead animal falls on your, on your rake. And what you're supposed to do is leave it in water until evening, and you wash it, you rinse it, it's unclean until evening, then you can use it the next day. Some of us would be trying to find dead animals to fall on our tools so that we wouldn't have to do any work. Verse 33, any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, you shall break. So if you had a pot made out of clay and one of these dead animals or creeping things fell onto it or into it, then you need to you need to destroy the pot. And whatever is in it, whatever's in the pot, shall be unclean. In such a vessel, verse 34, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. So basically anything that touches it, anything that was in it, get rid of. Verse 35, and everything on which a part of any such carcass falls shall be unclean, whether it is an oven or a cooking stove, it shall be broken down, it's unclean, and it shall be unclean to you. Verse 36, nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which there is plenty of water shall be clean. But whatever touches any such carcass becomes unclean. So why would a spring or a cistern remain clean? Anybody have a clue? What do you think?
Source of water.
It's a source of water, yes. And what about that source of water? Is it standing still?
It's running.
It's moving, right? A spring or a cistern, it's moving, so it's okay. Verse 37. And if any part of such carcass falls on any planting seed, it remains clean. Unless there's water in the mix in verse 38. If there's a dead animal and water get on that seed, you gotta get rid of it. Verse 39. If any animal which you may eat, any animal that you are permitted to eat, if it dies and you touch its carcass, you'll be unclean until evening. So you come upon some roadkill and you decide, oh man, that looks really good, and I'm really hungry, and I should just take some of that. You do that, you'll be unclean, ceremonially unclean until evening. Verse 40, he who eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. He who carries its carcass, wash your clothes, be unclean. Let's go on to the next, or the third main division, creeping things forbidden for food. Verse 41, let me just point out a word here. Okay, we're talking about creeping things that have died. He gets pretty serious here in verse 41 and uses the word abomination. Abomination means that it's hated, it's detestable. Don't eat those creeping things if they've died, and don't touch those creeping things if they've died. Again, get a stick, get a broom, get rid of it. Okay, we move on to the next section in verse 44, which is the call to holiness. Verse 44 says, we ask ourselves again, why do all of these things? And God gives reason why. Here's his reason. Some of us won't like it because we're those types of people, but here's what he says, verse 44. He starts in verse 44 by saying for, or because. Because we go, why not do all of this stuff? And certainly all of his people, maybe they had a better, idea of why God wasn't allowing these things, but certainly there was somebody going, but why? Why can't we eat these things? Verse 44, for I am the Lord your God. God tells them, here's the first reason. Number one is because he is God. He says, you shall therefore meaning because of. You shall, because of this, because I am the Lord your God, he says about himself, consecrate yourselves. Somebody tell me what it means to consecrate yourself. Anybody know what it means to consecrate? Consecrate. We talked about that in Exodus, I think it was. Consecration. We talked about it again in Leviticus. Consecrating the priests. It means that you are setting them apart for holiness. Okay? To be holy. He says in verse 44, you therefore, because I am the Lord your God, you therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy. He is essentially saying, holy yourselves, and you shall be holy. Or consecrate yourselves, and you shall be consecrated. Or set yourselves apart, and you will be set apart. And then he says in verse 44, for I am holy, God says about himself. You see, the first reason, and what God is doing here is he's calling them to holiness. You need to be holy. And he says, you need to be holy because I am holy, he says. You need to be a certain way because of your Father. Okay? And so even at your own homes, and this is the way it was when I was growing up, even in your own homes, there are things that are permitted and not permitted. For some of you, there's a rule at your home that you are not allowed to watch movies with sex scenes in them. For some of you, you are not allowed to watch movies with cussing in them. For some of you, there's a rule at your house that you are not allowed to watch scary movies at home. For some of you, it has to do with music. There are things that are permitted and are not permitted. You're not allowed to play music with cussing in it. Some of you are not allowed to play certain kinds of music even if it doesn't have cussing in it. If it's, it's 70s rock and my parents just hate it or whatever, and maybe it's because your parents grew up with that and, now, it's like that was from the past and, we don't listen to that. Whatever. There's different things that you can and cannot do in your home. And we can be angry about it and mad about it and say, well, that's not fair, and I don't like that, and that's not fair, and we should be able to do this and do that. But those are your father's or maybe your mother's rules, maybe both. You've got these rules. And God is telling his people here, listen, you're my people. He says, and I'm the Father and I'm holy, and these are the rules that I'm laying down. And because I'm laying them down, because I'm holy, you need to strive for holiness. Set yourselves apart. Let me tell you what God is not telling his people here. When he says holy, see, a lot of us get this idea, well, holy, that means that I need to float, or I need to glow in the dark, or I need to have a halo, or I need to be like the perfect Christian. And certainly what you and I want to do is strive for perfection. That is true. We're striving to be sinless. And so what we're attempting to do on a daily basis is to sin less and less. But also understanding and balancing that out with, as long as I'm on this earth, I'm never going to be sinless. I'm never going to be free from sin. Sin is always going to be a snag. It's always going to be a problem for me. And it's not until I get to heaven that I'll be sinless. I'll be free from sin. But as long as I'm here, it's going to be a struggle. But what God is telling his people here is you need to strive for holiness. You need to strive to set yourself apart. To consecrate. Set yourself apart. He makes it very clear here. What God wants to do is, let me tell you what he does not want to do. He does not want to duplicate the Egyptians. Meaning this, he's got millions of Jews at this point who have come out of Egypt, who remember Egypt, some of them fondly, who act like Egyptians at times in their practices. And so he wants to stop that because he wants, and this is a funny word, but this is what he uses, he wants a peculiar people. Now look around the room. Take a moment to look around the room. Are these people peculiar? You go, yeah, they are kind of. And some of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, they are pretty peculiar. And as I look around, I'm pretty much the only normal one in here, is what you're thinking. And that's what everybody next to you is thinking. They're looking at you like, yeah, this person is kind of peculiar. They're kind of weird. You know, why do they do that? Or then, why do they sit that way? Or why, what's the deal? But God wants a peculiar people. In other words, that word means that he wants people that are different from everybody else. Now, that has not changed from Leviticus to now. That hasn't changed. God still wants his people to be different from the world. You and I are going to be most helpful to the world when we are least like the world. You and I will be the most help to the world when we are the least like the world. And when I say world, I mean the sinful world system. I mean, just the world out there who's living godless. We are going to be the most help to them when we are the least like them. And yet what we do a lot of times in the church is we try to fashion ourselves and make ourselves just like the world. But what God wants is a separated people. If your unsaved friends, and you need to know this, I don't know if I've ever said, I've said it occasionally, but you need to know that your friends that are not saved, you not only can you bring them to church or church events, you should be bringing them to church and church events. You should be inviting them. But when they come, if they show up to this youth group, and we're like cussing and fighting and getting angry at each other, and there's drama all over the place, which sometimes the truth is sometimes we have that stuff, and then when we find out, we try to put a stop to it. But we want to be different so that when they see us, they see something different. If we're living just like they are, then what reason is there for them to surrender their lives to Christ? There's no reason. Well, I can go to church and still live the way I want to live. And so we want to strive to be different, to be peculiar, or to be holy, or to consecrate. And those words don't mean that we're perfect and man, I got to be the perfect Christian, and I just do everything right, and I've got a Christian haircut, and whatever, all those different kind of ideas that we have. What it means is that we're striving to be godly. Striving. But striving means I'm fighting, man. I'm clawing and I'm trying to be godly, but I keep stumbling and I keep messing up and I'm having a hard time. And your friends that aren't saved need to know that you are not perfect and that you don't think you're perfect. That you have issues, you have problems like everybody else does. But what you're trying to do is count on God. And they need to see that. Oh, that's how you do it. That's how you live, or that's what you do differently. That's what God wants from his people here. And so he gives them the first reason that he calls them to holiness. You need to be holy, he says, because I'm holy. I'm the Father, and you need to be holy. He says in verse 44 at the end, neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Not a problem. Verse 45, he gives the next reason why, not only because he is God, but because he rescued them, he redeemed them, he saved them. Verse 45, for, again, because I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I saved you. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. Don't be like the Egyptians. I saved you from the Egyptians, so don't be like them. Be different. Same thing for us. God saved us from the world, so let's not try to be like the world. I don't want to have some person that's not saved, my hero or my my number one model for things. I'm not trying to fashion myself after the world. I'm trying to be different. Verses 46 and 47 finishes up this chapter for us, and then we'll take just a couple minutes to go through chapter 12. We'll move fast, but look at verses 46 and 47. He just sums it up for us. This is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters and every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish, so you know, between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. Do you know that you don't have to turn there, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, some of us just read this not too long ago on Wednesday nights. He says, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And whatever I'm eating, whatever I'm drinking, I need to do all to the glory of God. Even what I eat and what I drink, I should be mindful of that? Yes. Yes, you should. I need to do it to the glory of God. Jesus said in Mark chapter 7, verse 15, there is nothing that enters a person from outside which can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a person. What does that mean? Well, we just finished reading through a chapter on clean and unclean animals. And some of us may be somewhat confused, and so I'm hoping to give you some clarification right now. It may be that you just read through that and you thought, oh my goodness, I had bacon this morning, or I'm going home to have bacon, or I just ate ham on Thursday. And man, now I'm unclean, but I guess I was only unclean until evening, and now I'm clean again, or whatever. I don't know if I washed my clothes from Thursday yet or not, or and I want you to understand something. In fact, I want you to understand a few things before we move into chapter 12. There are 3 things that I want you to understand about these laws. Number 1, God gave these laws only to the Jewish people. It was only the Jews. Okay? Number 2, obeying these laws guaranteed ceremonial purity, but didn't automatically make the person holy in character. Number 3, the laws that God gave here to his people were temporary and were ended on the cross of Christ. Did you know that? Did you know that you and I are no longer required to follow all these dietary laws? First of all, it was given to the Jews, to God's people, the Jews. And what happened in the New Testament, we're told in Colossians chapter 2, verse 14, that Jesus took all of those requirements and he nailed them to the cross. In other words, he fulfilled them all, so that you and I would no longer be required to fulfill them all. And so, why couldn't you just tell us at the beginning? Why do we have to read through the whole list? Well, I wanted you to understand the heart of the Father, that he was concerned about his people. He's given them specific instructions. It's a good thing. But I also want you to understand this, that the laws that were required for his people are not the same laws that are required for us. Are you allowed to eat bacon or eat pork? Sure you are. It's not the healthiest, but you can eat it. And what Jesus said here, it's not what goes into a person's mouth that defiles that person, but what comes out. In other words, you can eat, you're free to eat. You're free to eat whatever. In fact, we're told in Timothy that you're free to eat. In fact, did I put that down here? No, I did not. But you're free to eat. Or did I? No, I did not. Sorry. But in Timothy, Paul told Timothy, look, you can eat whatever you want as long as you give God thanks. Eat it. Now, nowadays, I would not suggest eating bats. Might get sick. It might spread all over the world. Might keep us from meeting for a while. I would want to be careful about what I eat, but only for health purposes. The foods do not make you holy or unholy. We have freedom in Christ. Christ, he met all of these requirements. Let's move on. Let's do this. Let's cover chapter 12 real quick. A couple minutes. Let's move on. Leviticus 12, laws following childbirth. You have offspring and offerings. Look at this, offspring, verses 1 through 5. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel. See this, if a woman has conceived, and she bore a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. As in the days of her customary impurity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of the male child's foreskin shall be circumcised. Now, if you do not know what foreskin and circumcised are, God bless you. I'm not going to tell you. But I am going to say this, that it is known for a fact that the blood in the body begins to coagulate, thicken, clot after the 7th day. So that on the 8th day, it was fine to perform this minor surgery on the baby, and there was no threat of the baby bleeding out, basically. Okay? So God says you got to wait the 7 days. On the 8th day, you can circumcise the baby. Verse 4, she shall then continue in the blood of her purification 33 days. She shall not touch any hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purification are fulfilled. But what if she has a female baby in verse 5? But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks. How many days was it for the boys?
7 days.
7 days. But if she has a girl, it's 2 weeks. As in her customary impurity, and she shall continue in the blood of her purification 66 days. How many was it for the guys? 33. So if she has a male child, the days of her purification are done sooner than with a female child. Why is that? Is that because God says that guys are better than women? No, Levi, that's not what it says. That's not what it means. Why is that? Does anybody know? Because I don't. So I don't know why he does that, but he does it. Here's the thing. Here's what some people believe. That maybe God gave them this law, gave the wife, this mother, this law, just to give her time to recuperate, time with her child. And if it was a male child, she would have that time, that week, those 33 days, whatever, to spend together. And if it was a female child, she would have 66 days, just her. She wasn't allowed to go different places and do different things. She just had to hang out, take care of that baby. Sounds like a pretty cool deal. We do something similar now. If you're working and you have a baby, you get what's it called? What kind of leave? Maternity leave. And now even guys in California can take maternity leave. Okay? And, kind of a cool deal. But here's what happens. After that, there must be some offerings. When the days of her purification are fulfilled, whether for a son or a daughter, she shall bring to the priest a lamb of the first year. She needs to bring a burnt offering and a young pigeon or a turtle dove as a sin offering to the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So this has to happen after the days of her purification. And then secondly, this happens in verses 7 and 8. We're told it's for atonement. Then he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her, and she shall be clean from the flow of her blood. There's the key. You see, after the birth, there are fluids, there's blood, and what God is giving them is these purification laws to maybe not only give her time with her new family, but maybe it's also to cleanse, we're told here, to cleanse the body of those fluids and the blood. Remember that God and the Jews held blood to be sacred. That was the life. He'll tell us that later on, that the life is in the blood, whether it's a person or an animal. The life is in the blood, so don't eat that blood. It's a symbol. This is the law for her who has born a male or female. And then finally in verse 8 as we finish, and if she is not able to bring a lamb, then she may bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One is a burnt offering and the other is a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for her, and she will be clean. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20, we were told this, for you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. All of me is God's. But again, let's finish with this question. Why learn all of these things? Why did God want to teach all of teach his people all of these things? Why was he so concerned about, this bird and that bird and these animals, and, if it's got this kind of legs, and if it eats this, or if it, has scales, or, if all these different things, or, if she's had a female child, she needs to wait this many days, and if it's been a male child, she needs to wait this many days, and go through all of these steps. The New Testament answers that for us in Ephesians chapter 5. Again, you don't have to turn there. You can if you want. But I'm going to read just a few verses from Ephesians chapter 5. And if you're a note taker, Ephesians 5, 15 through 17, if you want to write that down. But he says this, see then that you walk circumspectly. What does it mean to walk circumspectly. Does anybody know what that means, circumspectly?
Like with a clean heart, or
Not quite. What do you think? Yes, that's it. It means that I'm looking around, that I'm walking and I'm looking around. That I am to walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise. Redeeming the time. Buying back the time. Using the time. Because the days are evil, he says in verse 16. And then finally in verse 17 of Ephesians chapter 5, he says, therefore, do not be unwise, but understand what the Lord of the will of the Lord is. In other words, what God was telling his people, or teaching his people, was to be aware of everything that you do. Listen, if there are dead animals, be aware of that. Don't go touching things. You're going to make these things unclean. He's not trying to make their lives miserable by, oh my gosh, you know what? What's over here? What's over there? What he wants them to do is to be aware of their surroundings, to be aware of what it is that they're doing, what they're seeing, what they're watching, what they're listening to, how they're talking, who they're hanging out with, where they're going, where they're spending their time, what they're eating, what they're drinking, all of those things, because he wants them to be aware. But listen, though you and I are not required to fulfill all of these laws that you and I have just read through, those were for the Jewish people. And by the way, Jesus took all of those requirements, fulfilled all of those laws on our behalf so that we would no longer need to. Still, the spirit of the law, God wants you and I to be aware of all that we're doing, all that we're saying, what we're listening to, what we're watching, who we're spending our time with, what we're spending our money on, where we're going, what we're studying, who's around us, what's happening. He wants us to walk circumspectly, to be aware, and to be different, to not be like everyone else in the world, to not model ourselves after the celebrities of the day. If they're not Christians, there are some Christian celebrities. But we're not to model ourselves after those ungodly celebrities. Or their lifestyle. You know, the way they dress. It's not a big deal. Depending. It's not a big deal. But I'm talking about their lifestyle, the way that they act, the way that they live, the things that they pursue. You and I have got to be careful. We've got to be aware of those things. But maybe it's not celebrities. Maybe it's just people at school. And who am I trying to fashion myself after? What am I trying to act like? Am I saying, you know what? God is my Father, and He's holy, so I'm striving for holiness. Or am I saying, I like this guy or this girl over here, and they're really cool, and you know what, I don't care if they're saved or not, but you know, look how they're acting, I'm just going to do the same things that they're doing, and I start living the way that they do. God is saying, listen, we got to be different. You got to be aware of your surroundings, aware of the times, aware of what's going on and who's doing what. Know what's going on, and then make sure that you're different, that you are following God. That's the simple message. When we get down to the nitty-gritty, man, the bottom, what God wants is people who are different. Not perfect. He knows we can't be perfect. But striving for holiness. Striving after God. We call it, or at least I call it, following hard after God. What's God doing? What does God want? And where does God want me? And you know, how does God want me to live my life? Those are the questions that I want to ask myself. Father, thank you so much.